It is an honor to introduce our next speaker, Ingrid Schaffner. Ingrid is a curator, art critic, writer, and educator, and is the author of over 20 books and nearly 200 articles and reviews. And we are very pleased to announce today that she was recently appointed to curate the 57th Carnegie International in 2018. Since 2000, Ingrid has directed the exhibition program at the Institute of Contemporary Art at the University of Pennsylvania and has organized exhibitions of artists such as Polly Apfelbaum, Jason Rhoades, and Karen Kilimnik, bringing attention to under-recognized artists and or little explored themes and practices in the art world. Drawing from a deep understanding of the various facets of the arts and combining interdisciplinary approaches, Ingrid allows us to look at artworks from a different perspective. In the exhibition, Deep Storage, in 1998, held at MoMA PS1, New York, and Henry Art Gallery in Seattle, Ingrid focused particularly on artists that have discovered collecting and saving as means of artistic expression and have made the storage of objects and information the subject of the work. This exhibition gave a surprising insight in the artist's process of creating art, which itself is a result of collecting experiences and materials. This particular point of view can be directly brought into context with our conservation practice. Learning as much as possible about the artist and looking behind the curtains of an artist's studio is an essential part of our daily work and is a crucial tool for preserving the life of an artwork while conserving the concept and intention of the artist. Ingrid is here today to talk about the topic of inherent vice from a curator standpoint, focusing on the artist Jason Rhoades, who was featured in the ICA exhibition Jason Rhoades for Rhodes in 2013. We're very excited to hear her point of view on this very interesting subject, which is a particular interest to curators, conservators, and all caretakers of contemporary art. A warm welcome to Ingrid Schaffner.
Thank you, Juliana and Christian and your team. Everything about this convening is so generous, and I'm really pleased to be a part of it. Yes. Jason Rhoades, for Rhodes. It took place at the ICA, which is part of the University of Pennsylvania, fall 2013, and it's been traveling. It went to Bremen, and it just closed at the Baltic Center for Contemporary Art in northern England. So the Rhodes show is soon to be off the road. There were a lot of good reasons to organize this exhibition, starting with the work itself. Epic, sprawling installation composed of everyday objects and non-standard materials, each an exhibition in its own right. Rhoades called his works sculptures and considered them all one work, meaning one contiguous body of propulsive energy, expenditure, excess, emotion, and provocation. Each builds up and into the next, often literally, physically, with parts from one work going right into the next, so that it's like he's harvesting his own sculpture to make this one work, and the parts are always germinating to create the next move. What appears chaotic and manic, willy-nilly, is in fact meticulously constructed, layered, dense with narrative and associative meanings. The poet Kenny Goldsmith called Jason Rhoades a proto-internet artist. And indeed, to get into the work of Jason Rhoades is to jack into thrumming networks of thinking about labor and class, car, gun, and cowboy culture, consumer culture, Americanness, entrepreneurship, craft, insider and outsider strategies, personal and cultural myth-making, freedom and democracy, permanence and obsolescence, physicality and ephemerality, power. Indeed, the work draws a lot of its power from the precarity of these conditions within contemporary life. The next great reason for organizing a Jason Rhoades exhibition was that no one else was doing it. A California artist, Jason Rhoades, lived and worked in Los Angeles, where he died in 2006 at the age of 41. His reputation in Europe, where the majority of his one work had been realized was as a great American artist, and yet paradoxically here his work was largely unknown. So to introduce an American artist to the United States, to an audience in the United States, was another purpose of the show. And it was organized not as a comprehensive survey, but as a first pass or immersive foray into Rhodes's saturated art by way of 4 of these epic sculpture installations. So agreed, these are all worthy curatorial, good cause for organizing a Jason Rhoades exhibition, but they are of only passing interest to this symposium here today, where for the first time I can foreground what had been one of my ulterior motives for focusing on Rhodes's art, namely its turpitude. Inherent vice is what it's called in the conservation field when speaking of art that the very materiality of which is bound to buckle, shift, fade, rot, stop working, vanish, corrupt over time. And while Rhodes's art, on the one hand, appears to be the poster child of inherent vice, it can also be seen as the case study that jumpstarts a consideration of issues inherent to all works of contemporary art that are in some way based on a process of installation. Oh, there's Jason, poster child of inherent vice. But the way this work embodies conditions and questions of all art that's being made that is somehow based on processes of installation, like Sarah Z here, or performance and theatricality, Thomas Hirschhorn, organic and ephemeral materials, Janine Antoni's Lick and Lather, old and new technologies and media, Ryan Trey Carton, consumer goods and products that were not made to last, Rachel Harrison. So sadly, Rhodes's untimely death has turned questions that might have unfolded over time into immediate pressing issues. What is the work when an artist is no longer here to install, to answer questions, to express intent, to make the work come alive? To briefly engage these questions as a case study, I'm going to move quickly through the 4 major works that comprise the ICA show in terms of some of the more spectacular issues of preservation, conservation, storage, and display that they now embody, starting with the Garage Renovation, New York, Cherry Makita from 1993. Garage, studio, shrine, creche, tomb. Cherry Makita is essentially a giant paper container for a hulking V8 engine that works. Think of it as a massive collage. The walls of the garage are made of foam core with plenty of tinfoil and cardboard elements, plenty of Q-tips, popsicle sticks thrown in. It's kind of like a giant craft project or a kid's school project. Materials throughout were pushed to their creative limits or physical limits. For instance, Rhodes perversely used sheetrock as if it was plywood. So, you put sheetrock on studs to be a surface. It's not made to be used structurally. And when it is, as with this tool chest, it's in the front of the piece, it starts to crumble. So for the show, we had to recreate the sheetrock toolbox, an exhibition copy of that, because it's just crumbling. As casual and messy as this work might look, Rhodes was adamant that his art be clean. He was not interested in dust, dirt, the patina of time, all of which marks forces outside of the artist's control. Now that the work is outside of the artist's control, the effects of time inevitably and arguably are inevitable and arguably desirable. So I was interested in the world of car culture, car collecting these days. Like if you get that 1968 Volkswagen that's never been painted or refurbished, that's much more valuable than the one that's cherry. So it was kind of interesting to think of Rhodes's work in these terms. Parts of Rhodes's work are actually disappearing. When the work was first shown in '93, there were these, there's a whole narrative about counterfeit going on in the garage. So there are these oil silk screen counterfeit dollar bills. And they were vivid when the work was first shown. And now they're very faded and vanishing right before our eyes. So another thing that was going inside the garage was the dealing cocaine. And Rhodes, when he first installed the piece, very deliberately swept up lines of sheetrock powder, sort of coke, under the garage. And as the piece comes to us now, the bag of coke is very tiny and hardly but a dusting. So another, you can't see it, and I don't have a good image, I'm sorry, but see there's a picture on the wall in the back. It's a magic marker drawing on foam core, and it's the key to all these various narrative threads in the work. And Jason's intention was that you'd be able to refer to that key to get into the different levels of the work. And magic marker on sheetrock, it's fading, it's just disappearing. And I don't know what you do about that. So, Creation Myth from 1998 is also a schematic of sorts. It's a model. Here's the schematic drawing for that. It's a model of the artist's brain in action. So there's various areas of perception, storage, firing neurons. There's a train of thought going on a track around the sort of perimeters of that pile of tables there. Rhodes's brain connects by way of an esophagus that was made out of an IKEA play tube to the stomach, this big bag that's blowing up and collapsing. There's also piles of shit next to the stomach that were made of all the packaging that all of the materials came in. There is a rebellious prick. We had to gouge holes into the walls of the museum, and there was an asshole. So it was this whole universe of constellation issues unto itself. Creation Myth boils down to one basic question that we faced at every turn of its installation, that is, when to replace and when to restore elements in a work of art. So let's start with the soundtrack, because the work came with a soundtrack. LA hip-hop radio, AM radio, which itself is sort of like something soon to be obsolescent. So these recordings that were playing on cassettes in a boombox was a sort of soundtrack for the exhibition. For Rhodes, that was the music that he was always listening to in the studio and in the car, and he considered the car, as a California artist, an extension of his studio because he spent so much time in it. So there's this music, and we were encouraged at first to just play the cassettes on the boombox, but we quickly ended up putting all the cassettes on a little iPod, which like as big as a credit card, and it just sort of was tucked under the car radio, which seemed to be the source of all of this music. And there was a big, like, is that called a woofer? I mean, it was really powerful, throbbing sound. Then there was a smoke machine, and I don't have the sound, but you have to imagine it just went bang. So what was once the Ferrari of smoke machines, which Jason had hired someone to trick out so that it would blow a perfect smoke ring every 2 minutes, is now this leaky, fussy contraption. The company that makes this particular brand of smoke machine has gone out of business, and the brand of liquid smoke that you need to use is there's a more environmentally friendly version of this stuff. So, miraculously, we got the thing up and running. It is a little leaky, but once it gets going, it worked fine. But sourcing the smoke, that was something. So the logs in the forest of memory, which are clad in images of pornography and Rhodes' own art. So these are the images that preoccupy his brain. So these images are terribly faded. So they were made on a first-generation color printer, which is part of the piece. And we probably should have reprinted some of these images and repapered the logs using today's less fugitive and archival ink on paper. So ditto these color transparencies that were moving around kind of like ghosts on the wall. They were so faded and faint you could really barely see them. We probably should have reprinted those as well. So then there were things that we thought would be a problem. There's a whole bevy of VCRs tucked into the piece playing videos. And again, miraculously, took the VCRs to have their little heads cleaned, and they worked perfectly. So we played exhibition copies of the old videos. But this is, this should all be digitalized someday. So overall, whoever engineered this installation using consumer electronics, and there's just like hundreds of products in here, did an amazing job. So Jason's idea, and he might have been the engineer, he's very handy that way, was there's one cord and it comes out of the ceiling and you plug it in and the whole thing comes to life. And in fact, that works. So the functionality of the work is really part of the work. And so to show the work, you have to use it. So every day it was somebody's job at ICA to crawl into the brain, into the inner child section, and sit on this massage chair, get going, and then play this Nintendo game so that it would have new players and stop at a different screen. And my colleague Eliza Coviella turned out to be like a Nintendo, I don't know, like just a Nintendo gladiator. So, okay, so the concept of artwork that works was put to work or play by Sutter's Mill. So we showed it as Rhodes intended, meaning that we engaged a pair of technicians to spend every other day that the museum was open, every other day, they would methodically break the piece down and put it up. And they could do this about 3 times. So at the end of the day, they had to leave it intact so that on the alternate days, Sutter's Mill was just a sculpture. But on the other days, it was a sort of erector set. And the issues had as much to do with choreography as they did the wear and tear that comes with activating a work of art. So these poles are very fragile. They're made of aluminum, which is soft, that had been polished to look like chrome. They were harvested from what Jason called the biggest sculpture ever made, biggest indoor sculpture ever made, and he might be right, The Perfect World at Deichterhallen. And it was this cat's cradle, which Rhodes likened to Duchamp's 400 miles of string, but all made out of these polished aluminum tubes. As we're working the piece, it's getting dinged up and scratched, and so they'll have to be polished. So the work came color coded, but we couldn't understand the color coding. So once we got it up and running, we remarked everything with new tape, and now it just goes fine. This is when the work was first shown at David Zwirner in 2000. So at ICA, the technicians were taught by the studio assistant, Rhodes' studio assistant at the time, 2000, who had originally performed the work and who now lives in California. So we brought him to Philadelphia, and there he taught not only our technicians, but Ephraim Poussamp, who works closely with the Rhodes estate so that Ephraim can now pass that knowledge along. So passing on knowledge, like the skills and secrets of a trade from one generation of apprentices to the next, is a big part of a culture Rhodes constituted around his work, so he's sort of building a culture of work around his work. And it was really spectacularly demonstrated in the process of installing My Medina in Search of My Hermitage from 2004. So I should say this is how it was originally in 2004. It filled a train turnaround station. It was vast. So we presented but 4 sections of My Medina, like 133 neons of what were originally 1,000 neons, each an imaginative euphemism for the word vagina. Obviously, neon is delicate, and as a precaution, when the neons were being made, they made a nice stencil of each word, so if you break one, you can, Angelo in LA at his hot shop can just, whip you up another one. But less obvious is the fact that all of the transformers needed to be replaced. So the original transformers made in China didn't have any fuses. So they were prone to overheat, burst into flames, explode, so not acceptable at ICA. So the old ones were discarded, and we replaced all the transformers with new ones, ULA approved, and new replica stickers were made and applied. But we only did the one batch, only the 133, so there's still all the others need to be retrofitted. So then there were the towels. Aren't they beautiful? So then there were the towels. And we went to the same supplier that Rhodes had used, but they don't carry the same colors of towels, so approximations were made. And then there was the glue. So, because the towels are all held together with this glue. So, which is very visible. So first we had to procure this special glue machine, since the original one that Rhodes had used, he had incorporated into the Black Pussy Macrame Cabaret. So we got this glue cooker, and it's the kind of thing that you use to seal up cereal boxes. And we ordered the plastic pellets that get melted down in the machine from the same supplier that Jason had used, and he swore that the formula was indeed the same one. But when we cooked it up, the glue looked different. It was wrong. It was too silvery and gray, and it was supposed to look milky and white. And we tried different temperatures, but still the glue didn't seem semenish enough. Like here we are comparing. And finally, we ended up shipping some of the last remaining boxes of vintage pellets from Hauser and Wirth to, for our installation. But fortunately, and you know, those pellets are going to run out and somebody's going to have a problem. So fortunately, the plate piece came with plenty of spare ceramic donkeys and crystals and plastic vegetables. These festoon the floor of the work, some of which naturally disappear over the course of an exhibition. We sourced new camel stools on eBay. So you're building this terrain, you know, under the sort of the heavenly glow of the neons. There's this terrain, and this terrain has to be recreated every time the exhibition, every time there's a new venue. So, you know, we couldn't send our glued towels to Bremen. They had to start all over again. So they had to start again with the arrangement and composition of bales of new towels, followed by a sprinkling of tchotchkes, and then the squirting of the glue. And it's this Pollock-esque performance. We made optional the wearing of the holster that Rhodes found handy and the hosing of hot liquid over a large pictorial plane. And as comical as it is, what it exaggerates this process is the importance of touch. Gesture and the hand are critical expressions of Rhodes's work, where that was especially vivid was in the hanging of the neons. So here we see Lucas, villain, teaching Joel Fennell how to drape the thousands of feet of orange extension cords, which are as formal and febrile as lines in a drawing. And I thought a lot about silhouette, like how if you're going to, you know, install a silhouette, you have to, you know, it's an apprentice system of learning how to embody that touch and the look of the line and its composition. And without that learned feel for the artist's intentions, the work is inert, forensic, dead. Only experts can be trusted to do the job and lead the team. So I thought of this exhibition as my Ocean's 11 installation because I was bringing the team together for one more job. Lucas, Ephraim, Paco, Joel, Rick, each of whom had worked with Jason at some point. And so like Paco's the man you get to do Cherry Makita, and Lucas is, he is the guy who does the neon. So each has their expertise. But really, especially Rick Baker, who worked closely with Rhodes and now helps lead in the managing of the estate. Without Rick, this exhibition absolutely would not have been possible. He was really this link to the studio and forged this connection to the artist and the artist's intentions, but also Rick is the first to say that everyone who worked with Rhodes has his or her own interpretation of Rhodes's vision and touch. So how were decisions made? It was an ongoing conversation between a team of stakeholders led by the estate with Rhodes's dealers. Throughout the entire process of this exhibition, we consulted on every aspect, every move, because we knew that this installation was setting criteria and raising questions about how this work would be seen, stored, handled in the future. And so then part of this too, my work as a curator was to build a sort of relational network of collectors, studio assistants, art handlers, historians, friends, Christian Scheidemann, who worked closely with Jason, because Jason was very interested in these questions, the inherent vice that he was building in his work. He was interested in thinking about these things strategically. So, like many artists, Rhodes had his own ideas about how to handle the installation. I'd say like all artists, Rhodes had his own ideas about how to handle the installation of his work. And these ideas changed over time. In the beginning, he stipulated that only he could install his own work. So of course, this quickly proved impossible as the work began to have a life of its own, and Rhodes couldn't and didn't want to keep up with it. So he created these owners' installation manuals, binders full of documentary pictures and notes that you could imagine would serve as like an aide-memoire for Jason Rhoades in, as he's sort of leading a team in an installation. But there's no way you could use one of these manuals to install the work yourself. So, and one of my favorite moments in the creation myth, this is a crappy picture, but right next to the car stereo there, was the original manual for the creation myth when it was shown at Hauser and Wirth. And it had just been made quickly obsolete as the work was, shown at other venues, and this thing just proved useless. So Jason just chucked it into the sculpture. So, and I think one of the really valuable outcomes of the ICA exhibition was the creation of an inventory for creation myth that now cuts the installation time for this really complex work in half. Because imagine, it just showed up, all this stuff showed up in boxes without even a list of what all the parts were. So we hired a dedicated registrar to unpack and number every item. One day I came down and she just had this perplexed look on her face as she was she just unpacked a bubble wrap package that had in it a piece of bubble wrap. And on the outside of the bubble wrap, it said, bubble wrap inside is art. So this process took 2 weeks on top of the 2 weeks that it additionally took to install the work. Rick Baker also was working intensely on this, making videos and photos, so that now it only takes the registrar and crew, armed with iPads, 2 weeks, start to finish, to install Creation Myth. In the process of exhibiting the work, we also created templates for how the tables were set up for the Creation Myth. Oh, I love this. So like the tables, it's very precise how they sit on the backs of one another, or the tops of one another, because if you do it wrong, the train track doesn't lie flat, and the train flies off its track. So Paul Swenbach made this very sort of scale templates, so it's now easy to set up the tables quickly and well. We sourced materials and we identified suppliers, all of this contributing to the future of the work, to keeping it alive. And one of the things that made the Rhodes exhibition so successful as I believe it was at ICA, was the fact that we're a museum that we're dedicated to working with living artists, so the artist comes first. And Jason was not present, but we treated the work as if it was a live set of problems. And so it was that same problem solving that you do on the ground with an artist when you're making a contemporary exhibition. That's how we treated this work. So I want to end with this idea, which I've come to appreciate so profoundly through Rhodes's work and working on the show, of how integral the challenge of keeping art alive is to the very definition of contemporary art. So I said there were 4 Rhodes, but in fact there were 5. In its final presentation at the Baltic Center in Northern England, Jason Rhoades' 4 Rhodes had a different ending, featuring pyrofoam. So pyrofoam is this building compound that Jason Rhoades invented in 2002. It's just a repellent mix of dried green peas, white styrofoam beads, and red salmon roe fish bait, all coagulated and held together with copious amounts of Elmer's glue. So the Baltic installation featured 2 major pyrofoam sculptures, one of which takes the form of industrial shelving loaded with pyrofoam sculptures, sketches, leftovers, rubble. It's a sort of ready-made. This rack came straight out of the artist's studio where it had once festered and grown virulent before being fumigated and stabilized, because pyrofoam is organic, it's alive. Rats had gotten into it. There were issues of mold, insects. Rhodes's own prescription for dealing with these problems was to simply chunk off the bad bits, whip up a new batch of pyrofoam, and glom it on like Bondo. He even produced that handy kit, so to facilitate the job. And the kit comes in a small kind of cake box size as well, if it's just a small patch. So as ridiculous as it is, and I know it is, I find this so compelling. One work that has built into it what is essentially a life force, a refusal to sit nicely on a nail or pedestal, to stay the same, to behave, adamantly not an object, but a thing. Rhodes's art demands participation, problem solving, and interpretation, not just on a theoretical or imaginative level, but physically, materially. What is this work? Rhodes embraced his work's power to contaminate and animate, activate the relationship between art and those of us who live with, care for, think about, and contextualize contemporary art with all of its virtues and its vices.
Hi, Glenn Wharton. I'm fascinated by your process. I'm over here. Here.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I'm fascinated by your process. Of course, it begs questions of authenticity and artist intention and authorship. But I think rather than that, I'd just like to ask about the documentation. Where will it live? The documentation that he created and the documentation that you created. Will it live at ICA? Will it be made available for people in the future?
I'm giving all my binders to the estate.
Okay, so the estate
Happily.
will manage it.
Yeah, I mean, things that relate to the exhibition will stay with ICA, but really all this is kind of under the umbrella and very careful attention and consideration of an estate that's trying to navigate epic problems. So, yeah.
And do you have any idea whether they will make it available to people in the future, either for research or people who may conserve or recurate?
I would imagine, I think that they're quite, you write to them and approach, and they're interested in people getting into this work and opening it up. I mean, I felt like this was the opening of a field, this Rhodes exhibition, and I hope many others continue to move into it and grapple with Rhodes's work.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Oh, hi. I'm Sydney Briggs. I'm over here. Hello.
Oh, hi.
I'm a registrar, so I really appreciated that whole bubble wrap thing. And just to tack on to what Glenn was speaking about a little bit, you mentioned that in the creation myth, one of the installation books was created by Jason himself and then was incorporated into the
Yeah.
Yes, and incorporated into the installation. So I'm curious if you have any sense of the estate and whether or not this history, because essentially you've created a history through the installation and deinstallation of the work multiple times, do they see themselves possibly incorporating those things into the installation so that in fact it is changing because of the many hands that have touched it and the history that it's created?
So the estate is a great repository and was essential space for my making the show. I mean, they were really the source. And my whole project began with just going and spending time at the estate and really being a first sort of formal researcher too. So, they're trying to figure out as well how to make it accessible, but everything is there. So, and including all this really great documentation, video documentation was made of Jason walking and talking, leading people through. He was a very charismatic artist, and so there's these amazing videos of him telling people there's a really great one of him telling these totally bewildered looking gallery assistants how to turn on the creation myth in the morning.
So do you think that, but this is still a very early process for
Yeah.
them. They haven't really figured it out yet. They're still kind of creating as you know, this,
Yeah.
because I mean, he only died fairly recently.
Right.
I mean, it's not a very, we're not talking about an artist that died 25 years ago. So the whole process by which they will preserve and also historicize this work is still very infant. It's still
But does an
being
estate
developed.
I mean, there's that work happens in many ways through art historians, exhibitions, you know. So and the state isn't driving that car. The state was accessible to me because I was interested. So yeah, but there are
Thank
many
you.
representatives of different estates here, and I would imagine it's an ongoing problem no matter who your artist is. So okay.
Interrupt.
Run more. No.
We have to stop it.
Okay, all right. Thank you.